The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to listen to Jesus. But the Pharisees and scribes began to complain, saying, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." So to them Jesus addressed this parable. A man had 2 sons, and the younger son said to his father, "Father, give me the share of your estate that should come to me." So the father divided the property between them. After a few days, the younger son collected all his belongings and set off to a distant country, where he squandered his inheritance on a life of dissipation. When he had freely spent everything, a severe famine struck that country, and he found himself in dire need. So he hired himself out to one of the local citizens, who sent him to his farm to tend the swine. And he longed to eat his fill of the pods on which the swine fed, but nobody gave him any. Coming to his senses, he thought, "How many of my father's hired workers have more than enough food to eat? But here am I, dying from hunger. I shall get up and go to my father, and I shall say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Treat me as you would treat one of your hired workers.' So he got up and went back to his father. And while he was still a long way off, his father caught sight of him and was filled with compassion. He ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son.' But his father ordered his servants, 'Quickly, bring the finest robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Take the fattened calf and slaughter it. Then let us celebrate with a feast, because this son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found.' Then the celebration began. Now the older son had been out in the field, and on his way back, as he neared the house, he heard the sound of music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked what this might mean. The servant said to him, 'Your brother has returned, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf, because he has him back safe and sound.' He became angry, and when he refused to enter the house, his father came out and pleaded with him. He said to his father in reply, 'Look, all these years I served you, and not once did I disobey your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat to feast on with my friends. But when your son returns, who swallowed up your property with prostitutes, for him you slaughter the fattened calf.' He said to him, 'My son, you are here with me always. Everything I have is yours. But now we must celebrate and rejoice, because your brother was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found.'" The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
I have a few challenge questions for you to start off. You know, there are must-sees and must-dos when you go to places or when you're in different scenarios. Challenge question: if you're driving to Duluth and you stop halfway at Hinckley for gas, what else do you need to pick up before you head on your way? Toby rolls, caramel rolls at Toby's. Okay, you were successful on that one. Second one, if you travel to Paris, France to visit, what do you need to see before you leave? The Eiffel Tower, right, okay. And last one. You go to a movie theater and you want to get a snack before you go in. What snack do you get? Popcorn? Wrong. Reese's Pieces. That's the one I always get, Reese's Pieces. But I say these to highlight that there are must-sees and must-dos for different things and places and experiences that we have. And I believe strongly that one of the must-dos when you come to a Mass or to a Eucharist, something that when you come in this door, something that you need to not forget before you leave through the door, and that is to thank God. In fact, the very word Eucharist, as you know, means thanksgiving. And we should not just let the priest offer thanksgiving on our behalf and there's a predetermined liturgy that's designed. One of the main ways is to offer thanksgiving to God. We shouldn't just let Father do it. But we should ourselves personally, in some way during the Mass, must do during the Mass from our own hearts is to say thanks to God. And you probably have a long list of things that you could thank God for, and I would urge you to do that. And today, our gospel parable is the gospel of the prodigal son. And it gives us yet more reasons for thankfulness to well up within us when we come to this particular Catholic Church. Why? Because it further reveals just what type of God we Christians worship. And our Father in heaven it didn't have to be this way, but he is like that. Today, Jesus tells the story of the prodigal son. It seemed like it was just at the tip of his tongue, and he tells the story in this context. Tax collectors and public sinners were drawing near to him, and the Pharisees and the scribes see this, and they complain. This man welcomes sinners and even eats with them. Why is he fraternizing with these folks? Didn't God tell us that we were supposed to stay away from things and persons that were unclean? So Jesus challenges this idea and uses this opportunity to explain just what type of family he comes from and just what type of father he has. And we have heard this story before. A son wants to get out of his father's house and explore the world and to spread his wings. And the father is not a prison warden, and he allows the son to go. Why does the father allow the son to go? It is because the son possesses something that his father will never, ever take away from him, and that is his freedom. His freedom. Do you think that God perhaps thought long and hard about giving us this gift of freedom when he created us? I think if I had a lot of money and I could employ the best painter in the world, I think what I would have that painter paint would be firstly my wife. I'm on tape for saying that. But I'd also like to employ that painter to capture the Father as he thought about giving human beings freedom. Because it's a momentous scene. The Father pondering, giving us the gift of freedom. What would the expression of the Father's face be at that moment? And it's such a risk to give someone else freedom. Just think of all the bad things that human beings have done using their gift of freedom. All the good things too, right? God foresaw all of this, yet he gave us the gift anyway. So the son is, in this particular story, is allowed to leave. But what's more, the father gives him his portion of the inheritance. And the inheritance represents, I believe, all the gifts, the abilities, the talents that we humans have. It represents also the created world, the oceans, the rivers, the mountains, the animals that are under our dominion, perhaps. It represents the gifts of other human beings in our lives, our families, our friends. All of us have a huge inheritance. So the son receives this impressive inheritance, and then you know what happens next. He squanders it on sketchy stuff. And this sketchy stuff makes him poor and unhappy. And why didn't the father prevent him from making these mistakes? Why didn't he save him from this misery? It's his freedom, the gift that he thought long and hard about giving us. God didn't want slaves in his house. In fact, speaking of slavery, the son, in his free choices that he made, actually, became a slave of sorts. And this is such a great irony. When we try to achieve a certain freedom from God, from the Father, from religion, perhaps, and we try to live apart from God, the very opposite occurs. We become enslaved to all sorts of things, especially our passions. And we sometimes end up living in the company of animals, like the prodigal son, in the mud, eating pig food, with our noses to the ground when they should be up in the air. And there's no dignity in that. It looks pathetic sometimes. It's painful to watch. It is painful to watch someone living at a lower level than they should be, making poor choices, following every desire that pops up. And anyone who is a parent gets a front row seat to watch their children make good and bad choices. And if you're a parent who hasn't experienced your children making poor choices yet, don't worry, it will happen. Our children have something called freedom that we cannot control. God gave our children freedom and a mind of their own, right? To govern their passions and to govern the use of their freedom wisely. So the father in this parable watched. The father respected the freedom of the son. He watched the painful drama unfold. And the father in this story does not send a rescue mission to forcibly retrieve the son out of his misery. And yet we know that Jesus' mission is something of a rescue mission, right? But Jesus in this parable is not highlighting this rescue mission part of the gospel. In this prodigal son story, Jesus is simply painting a picture of how God works with us. He meets us, in a sense, halfway. The son experiences contrition for his sins, and then he begins a humble journey back to his father. The father does not seem to mind that the son is smelly from all of his sin. And to everyone's surprise, he gets up and he goes out to meet the son on his journey back. And to everyone's surprise again, he shows that he harbors no ill will toward his son. He forgives him, and he lavishly welcomes the son back and then restores him to his former place of dignity. I think those of us who are smelly should take note. But we should do more than just take note. We should celebrate. And as I was preparing this, I thought of like cheerleaders who cheer, "We've got spirit, yes we do, we've got spirit, how about you?" And then the other side says back and forth. We can say something like, "We've got a God like this, yes we do, we've got a God like this, how about you?" Or, "We've got a God who hugs smelly sinners, yes we do, we've got a God that hugs smelly sinners, how about you?" And it's just so much gratitude and gratefulness for the type of God that we have welled up in me as I pondered about this. So Jesus has just painted a picture of his Father's kingdom. And the kingdom includes robes and rings and festive meals and inheritances. But better than all of that, it includes loving embraces, restored relationships, forgiveness, togetherness, no resentment, and the freedom to stay or to leave. And the scribes and the Pharisees who observed Jesus were astonished, just like we are astonished. This man welcomes sinners, and he even eats with them. Yes, he does. So we have cause to celebrate. At every Mass, then, we should thank God, as they say, from the bottom of our hearts, because he welcomes us and he even eats with us. But before perhaps we celebrate too much, we need to keep in mind a four-letter word. L-E-N-T. Lent. There is no Easter party without Lent, because Lent is all about the journey back to the Father, like the prodigal son's journey back to the Father. It's about turning our backs on the parts of our lives that are still lived in the mud. It's about deciding for ourselves, using our freedom, getting up and making the hard journey back to the Father. It's about sorrow and contrition for our sins. It's about imitating the prodigal son, not in his sin, but in his effort to return to the Father, because he was humble. He was aware of how his sin had hurt others. He didn't presume, right? He didn't presume to get everything handed back to him on a platter. He asked for forgiveness. He promised to make amends. But the celebration, as the prodigal son made his way back to the Father step by step, the celebration was just around the corner. And we know we're in the season where Easter is just around the corner, and the pink vestments are intended to just remind us that the Easter party is just around the corner. So brothers and sisters, I encourage you to keep putting one foot in front of the other as you journey back to the Father during this Lent. And as your footsteps have brought you here to this church, to this Eucharist, to this Mass today, I would urge us all in some way, in some personal way, before we leave, to thank God.